Good evening, everyone out there waiting with bated breath for Esther Perel to join us. My name is Sean Fitzpatrick. I'm the executive director of the Jung Center, and I'm waiting too. We're all very much looking forward to hearing from her. She is with us. She is navigating some technical difficulties that were unexpected, but we expect her any moment. So thank you so much for your patience. Please hang on. We are very much here and ready to go live as soon as Esther is connected. So thank you, and expect more from us very soon.
Welcome to the Jung Center's Spring Benefit. The quality of our relationships defines the quality of our lives. I'm Morgan Garvey.
And I'm Henry Richardson, and we're co-chairs for tonight's event. For well over a year, we've been working to bring Esther Perel to the Jung Center, and we're thrilled that it is finally happening.
Esther's relationship wisdom is something we all need, all the time, but especially now, as we're all trying to figure out how to not just live, but to thrive in a socially distanced world. It isn't easy, is it?
Since March, we've been quarantined and isolated and distanced. We've faced challenges and fears that most of us haven't seen in our lifetimes. And through all of it, the Jung Center has been a steady source of practical advice, insightful virtual gatherings, and community, a calm in the storm.
The Jung Center has offered many free classes on meditation and mindfulness and laughter yoga, things that help us get grounded even as our world seems to be spinning. And thanks to your generous support, the Jung Center will continue offering those opportunities to reflect, connect, and learn together.
So thank you for joining us in support of the Jung Center, and thank you for being here with us tonight. We are grateful for your generosity and grateful for your friendship.
Hi, my name is Alejandro Chaul, and I'm delighted to be here in this very special evening for the Jung Center and bringing the mind, body, and spirit. In a day about relationships, and in a time that relationships are so difficult to be in person, that we're doing this online. So with that in mind, let's bring our mind inwards, and with our breath, connect to your body, noticing that wherever you are, you're being supported by the earth, and we all are. And in that interconnectedness, keep on breathing and maybe bring a hand to your heart so we can be in our heart mind, where we relate best to ourselves and to others. And with that, extend your arms so that even in this cyberspace, we can connect to each other. And as you let go of the arms and reconnect to your heart, have a great evening of interconnectedness and relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, Ale. And Morgan and Henry, thank you for all the hard work and many months you've put into making tonight a success. Good evening. I'm Sean Fitzpatrick, Executive Director of the Jung Center. We are so happy that you're joining us tonight, and we are delighted to bring Esther Perel into your homes. Her pioneering and profound insights into our relationships have changed countless lives. Her work resonates strongly with our work here at the Jung Center in Houston, Texas. Esther tells us that human connection has transformative power in all aspects of our lives. We have never needed human connection more than we do now. Navigating the challenges we all face depends on how we care for those precious links between us. Since 1958, the Jung Center has been supporting people's mental health through classes on site, online, and throughout our region. We offer classes that explore relationships and many other practical topics using psychology and art and meditation and spirituality. We prize compassion and creativity. None of us can separate ourselves from the matrix of relationships that sustain us. And the changes each of us wants to see in our communities always begin with change in ourselves and in our relationships. Through the Jung Center's Mind, Body, Spirit Institute, we offer customizable programs for businesses, hospitals, law firms, and schools, all designed to cultivate wellness and reduce stress. Through our work in the community, the Jung Center supports the mental health of many diverse groups. We teach frontline staff who are fighting the pandemic how to care for themselves so that they can continue caring for others. We provide free art and yoga classes to under-resourced children, helping them learn to cope with stress in positive ways. We offer lectures and roundtables exploring issues critical to the LGBTQ+ community. This summer, we offered multiple classes reflecting on race, inequity, and justice. Just a couple of weeks ago, we hosted Anthony Ray Hinton as he shared his story of incredible resilience in the midst of unthinkable oppression. He was on death row for 30 years for a crime he did not commit. We hope that you will join us for a class that interests you. Many students have said, the Jung Center saved my life. I hope that even in a small way, we can play a positive role in yours. Before we have the treat of hearing from Esther, we want to make special mention of our honorees tonight, Lisa Helfman and HEB, and Juanita Rasmus. Both of our honorees have worked tirelessly for our community and for the Jung Center specifically. Both Juanita and Lisa serve on the advisory board for our Mind, Body, Spirit Institute, and both of them are heroes of mine. Thanks to Lisa's efforts, HEB was one of the first companies to offer wellness programs to its employees through our Mind, Body, Spirit Institute. As the Director of Public Affairs in Houston for HEB, Lisa has the opportunity to steward the company's generous support to Houston nonprofits. The Jung Center is grateful to be among the many worthy nonprofits who benefit from HEB's support. Lisa is also the founder and board chair of the nonprofit Brighter Bites, which delivers fresh produce to schools across Texas and the country. I encourage you to learn more about their fine work. Juanita is, with her husband Rudy, co-pastor of St. John's Church in downtown Houston. People of every social and economic background gather at St. John's weekly, encouraged by Juanita and Rudy's warmth and their vision to eradicate classism, sexism, and racism. The couple also founded the nonprofit Bread of Life to provide meals and services to homeless men and women in downtown Houston. Additionally, with support from a collaboration of government agencies and Tina, Beyonce, and Solange Knowles, the St. John's campus includes the Knowles Temenos Apartments, which provides permanent homes for formerly homeless people. Juanita recently published her first book, Learning to Be, Finding Your Center After the Bottom Falls Out, which chronicles her experience of depression, relapse, and the transformational tools that put her back on her feet. Lisa and Juanita, we honor your work tonight. We are grateful for your friendship, and we thank you for all you do to make the world better.
Hello, Jung family. I can't thank you enough for the incredible and distinguished honor that you are providing me with today. I am so grateful and extremely humbled. It has been a pleasure to not only serve with Dr. Alejandro Shaul on the Mind, Body, Spirit Institute and with Dr. Sean Fitzpatrick and the Jung Center community family, but it has been an honor to count the Jung Center as one of the touchstones in my own life, one of the places that has indeed been for me a place of healing, a place of hope, a place of learning to be. I want to say thank you to the benefactors and all those who continually underwrite and support the work at the Jung Center, especially now, especially at a time when our city and yet our world are most vulnerable and most in need of the kind of support from mind, body, and spirit that has long been the narrative of the Jung Center. My heartfelt thanks to each of you for all that you do to continue this work, not only in Houston, but literally for touching lives around the world. Thank you so much, and I am so appreciative. Do enjoy your time.
Hi, my name is Lisa Helfman, and on behalf of HEB and myself, we are so honored and humbled to receive this award from the Jung Center. The Jung Center is such a special place in our hearts. I have served on the board for the past 5 years, and when I started serving on the board, I was just delving into the mental health aspects of my life. The Jung Center provided so many tools to me and to our partners at HEB to really delve deeper into what it means to live a happy and healthy life. Mental health is the undercurrent of everything we do. It touches and colors the world that we see. And the Jung Center provides these accessible tools so we can all be on our journey to live a happier and healthier life. I'm so happy, I'm so blessed to be a part of everything that they do on a daily basis as a board member, and I'm honored to receive this award with HEB. Thank you for everything you do for our community, Jung Center. Keep it up.
Good evening. I'm Melanie Gray and a member of the Board of Trustees of the Jung Center. And on behalf of the Jung Center and all the trustees, thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for your support of the work of the Jung Center. As many of you may know, I'm a trial lawyer, and one of the common questions asked of potential jurors during voir dire, as we say here in Texas, is who would you sit down and have dinner with if you could have dinner with anyone who has ever lived? Common responses are Margaret Thatcher, Michelle Obama, even the Dalai Lama. For me, hands down, it would be Esther Perel. And the spring benefit, back spring, was supposed to be that dinner. But although we aren't able to break bread together tonight, please know that I'm having the virtual dinner of my dreams. I first became aware of Esther's work when I stumbled upon her first award-winning book, Mating in Captivity. Our kids were grown and out of the house, and I knew Mark, my husband of 32 years at the time, and my relationship would be going through and should be going through a new stage, inhabiting a new space, one in which we had the opportunity to explore who we had become individually and as a couple during those 32 years of marriage. More importantly, I wanted to understand how best to navigate these new waters ahead with courage, with the courage to take risks as a couple in our growth so that the next 32 years would be as engaging, enjoyable, rewarding, and yes, at times as challenging as the first 32. The rest, they say, is history. I became an immediate devotee and student of her extensive work. I consider it a great day when I can rewatch one of her TED Talks, which has had millions of views. I can listen to one of her podcasts. I can read her monthly newsletter. I can even be invited and join her in her quarantine space in upstate New York via Zoom to learn how to navigate these very challenging times in our romantic, familial, and work relationships. It's truly an extraordinary body of work. Esther's life story is worthy of its own book, and a bestseller it would be as well. Born in Belgium to parents who were each the sole Holocaust survivor of their families, Esther realized by watching her parents as they navigated their lives that they were thriving compared with how she experienced many other Holocaust survivors in her community who only seemed to be surviving. Esther's parents learned how to thrive, and Esther's life mission, what gets her up in the morning, is teaching us how to create and nurture relationships that allow us to thrive. And I'm so glad she gets up every morning. Esther Perel, therapist and author, is one of the best-known experts in modern relationships. Fluent in 9 languages, she's counseled couples all over the world over the past 3 decades. The New York Times named Esther as the most important game changer on sexuality in relationships since Dr. Ruth. In addition to her expertise on intimacy and romantic relationships, Esther now also serves as an organizational consultant for Fortune 500 companies around the world. In her newest podcast, How's Work?, she's begun translating and sharing her insights gleaned from decades of couples counseling into relationships in the workplace, a place and space where many of us invest more of ourselves than probably we should. On top of all that, Esther serves on the faculty of the Family Studies Unit in the Department of Psychiatry at New York University Medical Center and on the faculty of the International Trauma Studies program at Columbia University. I am simply ecstatic and so honored to present Esther Perel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am going to have dinner with you. Feel free to sit, eat with me, break bread, have a tea, have a drink, be comfortable, and take notes of your questions so that after I laid out some of my ideas, we have a chance to also speak together. I would like to start with a credo of my work, which I think fits working with the Jung Center, which is that the quality of our relationships is what determines the quality of our lives. At the end, there's only two real questions that will matter. Did I love, and was I loved? It's been 35 years since I work with couples, families, and individuals from all over the world, with all passports, helping them to navigate the challenges and the complexities of modern relationships. But for me, in order to understand the word modern relationship, I feel like we need to look back at how relationships have transformed over time and how they're quickly, rapidly changing during this completely surreal year. So I thought, just to put us in the space, to start with a piece of the podcast, Where Should We Begin?, which is a podcast where I feature live, real, unedited couples who are in a one-time 3-hour couples therapy session with me. And in the throes of the pandemic, in April, we looked at couples from all over the world whose problems were compounded because of the physical space that they were sharing. We went to Sicily, to Germany, to Lagos, Nigeria, and to New York City, all from the same desk at which I'm meeting you tonight, via Zoom. But it allowed us to go directly into people's kitchens, living rooms, and to talk with couples that were in lockdown. This particular couple came to my podcast. They have 3 children. They live in New York, and their volatile marriage has fallen apart. She still hopes to rebuild. He can't get out of there fast enough. 2 weeks before COVID-19 forced New Yorkers to shelter in place, they filed for divorce, and now they feel trapped. Let's listen for a moment.
I love being married. You know, I loved
the other one.
I love being married.
Listen, every mother.
Yep.
Listen, every mother is singing this same tune, right? I am home cooking 3 meals a day, homeschooling 3 children, 2 of whom are too young to really be able to do anything on their own, the 11-year-old better. But still, I'm having to manage all of that and, you know, make sure we have groceries and make sure we have toilet paper and paper towels and just all the stuff that is coming with this. And this is the time he wants to like also make me try to keep our children safe from their own father moving out because he's not safe from someone he's been married to. I'm safe enough to leave the children with. I'm safe enough. I mean, I'm safe enough for everything. It's just like to me, it's such a middle finger in my face in the middle of this horrifying thing that's happening all over the globe.
But the issue is that you would like to be able to live in the home, but continue your relationship with your girlfriend?
I certainly would like that. I'm not doing that. I mean, I could do that, but I would have to leave and it would be unsafe. Like if I were to leave, let's say, and move into an apartment, I would not be able to see the children. And right now that looks like it's at least a month based on what the authorities have said. And I'm not willing to not see my children for a month, especially at this time of transition. And quite frankly, I am concerned for them, because I think it is hard to process this. It's hard for both of us, and for my wife being alone with shouldering all the responsibility without me being able to help at all. Because if I can't see them, I can't help. And then I'm worried about the stress and the feedback from that with the kids. So for all those reasons, I'm sort of trapped.
Trapped they were. When we lived in a village or when we lived in closed communities, we knew just about everybody's problems. You could hear it through the porous walls. But that has changed. And we, at this point, are often faced with curated couples. This same couple that can feel completely trapped in their house is posting idealistic pictures on social, filtered and edited images, perfect Facebook family vacations. Basically, fake news is not just for politics. It's how we present our lives. And so at a time when we crave authentic connections, we seem to be living in an inauthentic atmosphere where we curate our lives for public consumptions. And with the podcast, Where Should We Begin? I was wanting to bring us back to the village, to go behind the scenes and to hear the real problems that people are dealing with. You see, I look at the world and at our culture through the lens of couples and families, or through the lens of how we establish our relationships. It is but one lens, but it is one that I would like to invite you to join me at. If we understand how relationships have transformed over time, we have a better chance of understanding how relationships are transforming us at this moment in these unprecedented times. So I thought, let me just give you for a moment the larger picture. What are some of the big shifts that have taken place? What is the backdrop against many of our love relationships, family relationships, and work relationships are taking place? And again, I think the real first and foremost shift that I start with is the movement from tribe and community to city and individualism. I can't say this from the past to the present because much of the world is still living, primarily in communities and in tribes as well. But in our Western world, that is the fundamental shift that took place. And with that, we shifted from a lifestyle that was organized around structure, around duty, and around obligations imposed to us by our community, often a religious community, to an urbanized life in which we have a lot more freedom, a lot more choices, a lot more options, but in which we are also a lot more alone. We moved from a structure that was clear. When you're told what to do, you may have very little freedom, but you have a lot of certainty. When you live in an ambiance where you can do what you want, you have to face the burdens of having to know what it is you want. You have to be able to deal with the uncertainty and the self-doubt that come with that freedom. And this shift to individualism is really what has defined much of our relationships at this moment. Loneliness is about to be the emotional pandemic of the West. Well, then we should say epidemic, probably. That would be more correct. We are in a kind of chaotic continuation of modernity, where we shift from one social position to another in a rather fluid manner. The sociologist Zygmunt Bauman was describing this beautifully in his book, Liquid Life. And he talks about how we are continuously changing places, changing jobs, changing spouses, changing values, and sometimes more, changing political orientation and changing sexual orientation. we have excluded ourselves from the traditional networks of support, and we have freed ourselves from the restrictions or the requirements that come with those networks of support. But when you replace the traditional patterns and you want to create your own, you are left with a tremendous amount of responsibility. In relationship language, that goes with those types of questions. How do I know that I have met the one? Is probably one of the most important questions young people ask me today. How do I know when it's time to leave a relationship? At the other side of it, how much should I work? How much should I exercise? How much should we listen to our children and let them make the decisions? How should I be buried? Should I even be buried, or should I be cremated? When duty and obligation and set structures are no longer defining the moral code, we need a new one. And that new one at this moment has become organized around the concept of trust. Trust is meant to create solidity. It's meant to create commitment. It's meant to create permanence. We talk about trust in relationships, but we also talk about trust with brands. I mean, it's all over the place. We are studying the science of trust, as the new structure that is meant to create a cohesive force. So for me, this decentralization of authority in our society that has led to more choices, but also to more self-doubt, brings with itself its own subtle form of tyranny, which is the paradox of choice, which enters into our relationships from the moment we start to date, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And that, in turn, seems to be creating a clear longing for more authoritarian structures that will bring order to our chaos. And that's the loop. Structure dissolves, it creates freedom, the freedom becomes chaotic, the chaos demands more structure, the structure demands more authority, and so we roll. Centuries after centuries. Communities used to give us the sense of belonging, of identity, and of continuity. And today, I would say that we are turning primarily to our intimate relationships to help us be the salve against our lives of increasing isolation and increasing atomization. Friendships haven't changed too much. Sibling relationships haven't changed too much. Parent-child relationships have changed quite a bit. And probably no other unit has undergone a bigger makeover than our romantic relationships, starting with an exponential rise in our expectations. When marriage was primarily a production enterprise for economic sustenance and a partnership for life, for family, economic support, social status, companionship, we had a lot of children that helped us work the land. They were primarily economic assets. And I look at this as the production model of relationships, which at the time was basically marriage. That was the only form, actually. And then comes the service economy. We bring romanticism, our need for belonging, into our relationships. And we start to look at the quality of our experience with this partner. We still want everything that traditional marriage brought, but now we also want a friend and a confidant and a lover, all in one. And we turn to this one person to give us that sense of anchor and the wave, of stability and surprise, of familiarity and novelty. And we are more and more turning to one person to give us what once an entire village used to. And now changes accompany this. Marriage used to be a one-time enterprise for life. You got in there, and if you didn't like it, well, you were stuck. It was till death do us apart, and you could always hope for an early death of your partner if really it was miserable. We have shifted that from till death do us apart to till love dies. And love marriages are more fragile. They're more vulnerable to the vagaries of the heart. Marriage today is a free choice enterprise, certainly in the West, and our commitments are built on love. not on structures that keep us together regardless of. And one of the reasons why I became so interested in intimate relationships and couples is that it is the first time in our history that the survival of the family depends on the quality of the relationship in the couple. Until now, until not too long ago, couples, it didn't really matter if they liked each other, didn't like each other, got along, didn't get along. The family was a set structure. This notion that it is the happiness of the couple that will determine the survival of the family has completely toppled the equation. And then a few other major changes happened to this production model shifting to service model, which is then going to shift to identity model of intimate relationships. We brought happiness from the heavens to earth. We are asking on earth what we used to wait for the afterlife. And intimacy is at the core of marital bliss. Intimacy, which used to be a byproduct, is now a mandate. And it means into me see. It's a communicative experience of self-disclosure in which one enters the other and hears their interiority and is invited in. And it is that meeting on the inside that we call intimacy. But interestingly, while the importance of intimacy expanded, the way we conceive of it has narrowed. We don't plow the land together anymore, we talk. And if intimacy grew out of a lifelong shared work, I would say that at this moment, intimacy is what many of the couples who come to see me work on. It's intimacy itself that we work at. And then we changed fundamentally our relationship to sexuality in long-term relationships. Sexuality, which was primarily for procreation, has moved to recreation. It moved from duty and primarily a woman's marital duty to a structure of pleasure that actually fits our consumer society. Sexuality today is rooted in desire. We want to want. We don't want to do it because we have to. Feminism and the gay movement are probably two of the most important social revolutions, and contraception was the scientific revolution that changed and liberated sexuality from its primary meaning rooted in nature and biology to it becoming socialized and becoming a property of the self. So that today, many of us will look at sexual bliss as our due and as part of the conception of intimacy. Now, in the US, there is a very intense relationship to sexuality that goes back and forth between permissiveness and repression, between the desire to open up, with the proselytizing of a pansexuality on the one side that is met on the other side with worry and vigilance and a structure of danger, prohibitions around sexuality. So the social structure goes in two extremes quite often, but on the inside, it is quite clear that people experience sexuality as part of marital happiness. And that seems so much of a given at this point, but it wasn't a given 1 or 2 generations back, actually, for some of us. Another major change is that we are living in a world that is in constant motions, and we uproot ourselves sometimes faster than we can repot a plant. We can have 1,000 virtual friends and no one to ask who to feed the cat. We are experiencing a particular kind of isolation in our modern living, in our small little apartments in which we were each living alone. Until everything changed quite recently. You know, we are a lot more free than our grandparents, but also a lot more disconnected. And all of that, the backdrop, happens against a kind of a human imagination that has conjured up a new Olympus. Love will remain unconditional, intimacy will be enthralling, sex will be oh so exciting, all for the long haul, which of course keeps getting longer, and with one person. All of that is happening while we are also creating a completely new name for this person with whom we want to live. We call that person our soulmate. And the Jungian analyst Robert Johnson was very helpful for me in really rethinking this, how in our secularized society, romantic love has become the greatest energy system in the Western psyche, how we seek meaning and transcendence and wholeness and ecstasy in romantic love, and how this quest for the soulmate, we end up conflating the spiritual with the relational. I mean, this is a word that used to be reserved for God. And we seek in our relationships a kind of perfection that we used to look for in the sanctuary of the divine. This very religious approach to love, and to romantic love in particular, meets consumerism at the same time, where we are looking for this soulmate on an app, where we want to make sure that we get a return on investment and that we can hedge our bets, that our needs are met. And not only that we go from this production economy model, service model of relationship, we then move as a soulmate, we move to the identity model. As Eli Finkel says, you are going to help me become the best version of myself. That is an identity model of relationships. We also have brought that identity model to work. Work too has to give us purpose and meaning and personal self-development at this moment, because the identity project is kind of at the heart of our social living at this moment. So, what's a stable household and a good income and well-behaved children if we are bored? It is the quality of our experience that we see as synonymous with the quality of our relationship. We don't think of love so much as a verb. We think of it as a noun. We see it describing a permanent state of enthusiasm, of infatuation and desire. That's one set of changes. When I just tell them to you, I feel, we don't think of it like that. When you keep your finger close, you see little changes. When you bring it further away and you gain perspective, you begin to realize how many things like that used to be taken for granted. We used to marry and have sex for the first time. Today we marry and we often stop having sex with anybody else. We used to stray because marriage was not supposed to deliver love and passion. Today, many of the couples I work with, they stray because the marriage has failed to deliver the love and the passion that it felt that it had promised them. And then you think about all of that, and on that app, while you're looking for that unique human being that's going to help you become an even more unique human being, how do we deal with the massive amounts of choices that we have, with the FOMO experience, with this idea that I have this, but I could have that, but I could find better, but how do I know this is it? This is a little bit of the crazy making of the tyranny of the paradox of choice. And then comes the hedonic treadmill. I have it, but I could have more, I could have better. Why should I suffice myself with what I have? Why is good enough never good enough, or not good enough often enough? Technology is definitely giving us all kinds of opportunities, but it is also throwing us into a bigger pool of ambiguity with less rules and less guidance. Exclusivity used to be simply an imposition. It was primarily an imposition on women. Men have always had a double standard. Today, exclusiveness becomes the sacred cow of the romantic ideal. I waited for you so long. I meet 10 years later, I marry 10 years later, or mate 10 years later than we used to not long ago. In the 60s, 80% of people in their 20s were married. Today, it's 20% in their 20s are married. So that gives us 10 years of nomadism to find that soulmate for whom we are then going to sometimes promise exclusiveness as the marker of our commitment. All of that is the culture of relationships, of romantic relationships at this moment. And as you know, I wrote a whole book, or if you don't know, it's called The State of Affairs, where I study modern infidelity and why it has shifted from being painful to becoming traumatic. What is the meaning of infidelity in marriages that are based on love, in marriages where people waited 10 extra years to find that special person? And how does it become synonymous with the shattering of the grand ambition of love? Very different from an infidelity in a traditional relationship, which was often an expression of power and of male power primarily, with women who had no other option, and in relationships where love wasn't meant to be at the center of those marriages, so that people often went to seek those very things that were not part of the dominant model. Infidelity today throws people into a crisis of identity. It becomes the ultimate breach of trust. It becomes a violation. It becomes a complete loss of self. And that is what makes it become traumatic. But we also live in a society, in a consumer society, that has entered and infiltrated our intimate relationships, where the need for faithfulness intensifies, and so too the pull toward unfaithfulness. In a time when we depend on our partners emotionally for so much, affairs become devastating. But in a culture that mandates individual fulfillment and lures us with the promise of being happier, never have we been more tempted to stray. And this is part of why we condemn infidelity more than ever, and we practice it more than ever. And all of that brings us to the here and now, to this. Here we are in the middle of these relational transformations, and we're on the path to understanding them, and boom, 2020 comes along and changes just about every aspect of our life. Suddenly, here we are, either on top of each other 24/7 like never before, or alone like never before. We have a pandemic that throws us into an economic upheaval, that throws us into social and racial reckoning. We can't go fast enough, combined with economic and environmental catastrophes. There's a sense of apocalypse that surrounds us, in which more and more we either turn to our relationships and to hold us, to give us a container, to ground us, to give us a modicum of a sense of security and continuity, or we feel the exact opposite. Why? Because disasters or crises act as relationship accelerators and intensifiers. We suddenly are acutely aware of mortality and of the fact that life is short. And when life is short, we say, what am I waiting for? Let's be together. Let's move in, even though we were just dating. Let's have a child. Let's create as an antidote to the finiteness of life. And on the other side, we say, life is short. What am I waiting for? I've waited long enough. I'm out of here. Life is too short to accept some of the compromises that I have had to make. And it's really these two extremes that we often will notice in the midst of a disaster, except that this disaster is not similar to the ones we are more familiar with, where we know that there is a warning stage and a planning stage, and the actual onslaught followed by the post-event. Here we are living, for some of us, for the first time, and for others, it's the world finally meeting us where we've always been, with a prolonged sense of uncertainty. We don't really know where it's going. We keep talking about going back to normal. Now we replace it with going to the new normal, but actually nobody knows. Nobody knows. We know a few things scientifically, and every day a little bit more, but no one knows where the world that we live in, where our relationships are actually going. So this is the same with work. We are quarantined or confined, or at least not going to the office, many of us, and we are experiencing a transformation of our professional lives. For one, this chair where I'm sitting now, I've been at this chair for months. I am a mother, a wife, a teacher, a therapist, a speaker, a boss, an employer, all of this at the same table. I don't leave anymore to inhabit my other roles. All the roles are conflated in one space and they overlap. We used to go and change to go and exercise, change to go and see friends, drive to go to work, have spaces, spatial interludes, and timely interludes in between the various parts of our identity. All of that has merged often into one place at this moment. And it mandates us to find new routines and new rituals and the establishment of clear boundaries. Prior to COVID-19, our relationships were already undergoing all kinds of transformations. But we used to bring our relationship resume to work, which means that we brought to work our history, how we relate to people, how we learned, whether the focus in our life is on autonomy or on interdependence and loyalty, whether we have been trained for self-reliance, whether we were trained for dependence and interdependence with others. Now, we're not just working from home, we're working with home. We've never been more physically separated from our colleagues, and we've never been more intimately connected to our colleagues. And for many of us, the mute button is the final boundary. We've traded this illusion of the mastery that we had to confront a number of very important relational experiences. One is anticipatory grief. The other is the actual grief. So the anticipatory grief is that notion of loss that isn't just connected straightforward to death, but to the loss of the world that we lived in, that we no longer have our references. The grief itself is the response that we've had to the multiple losses that we are experiencing. Many of us who have lost members of our families or people that we knew or people at work or people, it's this collective sense of loss that is part of the grief experience at this moment, combined with the confinement. Some of us have never felt more alone because we are alone, but some of us have never felt more alone in the midst of other people. Some of us have suddenly returned to living in an intergenerational life with parents that we brought in, with 3-4 generations in the same house. And that was not necessarily how we used to do it. And how do we find that space for desire in the midst of confinement is a question that people have asked me continuously. And one of the main ways that I began to think about it is something that I did learn from my parents, from when they would describe years in the concentration camp, but also from many of the other survivors that I grew up with and many survivors of other genocides and war experiences that I've worked with since. Freedom in confinement comes through our imagination. You watch the children, they turn around and they suddenly are the queen, the king, the master, the fireman, the teacher. They enter through play, through their imagination, into an identity, and it allows them to go beyond the confines of reality, the limits of the particular situation that they are in. And this is something that we do too. We do it by going to Netflix sometimes, we do it by reading a novel, but it is through our imagination that we can understand that if we can't go to take a trip on the outside, we may actually take a trip on the inside. We may go where our bodies can't take us through our mind. The pandemic then led to all kinds of social upheavals and a complete new kind of racial reckoning. And I want to play another piece of the podcast. This is a couple that has been on and off again for the last 15 years, raising their 15-year-old daughter. And the pandemic made them more isolated because all they have is each other. And they feel lonely in their own bed. So let's listen.
I loved being married. I love being married. I like the idea of it. I like what it means. And I don't want to force it.
You?
It means a certain level of stability, especially because we're Black and we have been, denied like strong family bonds, strong generational family bonds. None of my aunts are married. My grandmother died single. My great grandmother died single. It would definitely be an act of love. I couldn't just marry anybody, but it also it's political. Like it's kind of throwing in the face an entire, system that says, Black men and women, they don't commit to each other. They don't create strong family bonds. And so it's like being married, it's important. It's special.
Absolutely.
You have the world telling you that, Black women are not beautiful and Black women are not intelligent. And I feel like I internalized a lot of that. And I didn't date a lot in middle school and high school, in college. And so there's a little bit of that in there also.
And when it doesn't touch you, that comes up more?
Like we sleep in the same bed. It's a big bed, so we have space. But there are some, I would say every morning when I feel him wake up, I wake up before him, but I don't move because like maybe you will like just touch me on the back, something simple, Some morning. I like myself a lot. I think a lot about who I am and what I want to project to the world and what I am, the kind of daughter I am, the kind of teacher I am, the kind of mother I am. I try to be as authentic as possible, but there is a part of me that it's very important to be wanted.
Mm-hmm. When I was trained as a therapist, my mentor was Salvador Minuchin. I studied structural family therapy. Then I studied feminist psychotherapy and systemic therapy from a feminist lens. Then I studied narrative therapy. But in all these approaches, which sat on top of the traditional psychodynamic, and it was clear to me that whenever we spoke about relationships, we had to go from the psychosocial to the familial, to the interpersonal, and to the intrapersonal. And for a while, with the kind of infatuation with the brain, therapies began to leave the societal aspects and just focus more on attachment and on brain and on physiology. I think that 2020 has brought back the immediacy that even talking about desire, that talking about wanting to be wanted is a political experience, that we can no longer separate our work as therapists from what's happening in the world around us at every level. That demands that we become more flexible, that we become more adaptable, that we can be ready to pivot in our approaches, in our work, as therapists, as clinicians, but also in our lives for everybody else, that we can tolerate and cultivate our tolerance for uncertainty rather than pretend that everything is fine. That it's not just about rolling up our sleeves and getting to work and having effort optimism. Couples therapists, I think, especially for these times, we are uniquely positioned to deal with polarized relationships. We can really sit for hours with people who don't agree on anything, who were in the same situations and each of them heard and saw something completely different. This is what's happening in the world around us as well. It requires that we not just be efficient, but that we be resilient. That is that ability to be flexible and to bounce back. I think what is happening at this moment in relationships is that we are experiencing a completely new interdependence. It's very basic. We don't just wear a mask for ourselves, we wear it for others. And we've talked about it historically. We've been moving from this exaltation of the individual to now moving again towards a new communal connection. That is not true for all of us. Many of us live in a community and strive for more space and more individuality. But many of us have been in a space of more individuality and isolation, and we are craving to come back to something that is more communal and more collective. We keep hearing we're in this together. We're all in this together at this moment. But what does that really mean? It's about reconciling these communal needs with our individual desires. It's about reconciling our need for continuity as well as our need for novelty that makes us feel alive. Certain things are going to profoundly change and we're not going to come back to them. And certain things are going to become legacy that we carry with us as we create new forms, particularly at this point, new forms of work. That's going to be the place where the big changes are going to take place. And this other communal reconnection is how we can marry together our sense of belonging with our sense of freedom. It's about helping each other understand our relational evolution so that we can bring this collective intention to what we build from here. And on this point, I want you to just, if you have a moment, a phone or a piece of paper, write down 2 or 3 thoughts, moments, associations that you had to some of the things that I brought to you, just to kind of punctuate it for yourself. Rather than me telling you the 3 things I hope you take with you, for many of you, it may be one thing, and for somebody else, it's something completely different. So just for a moment, what are 3 things, moments, sentences, words, images, memories that were evoked for me as you were listening to me? And from here, we can move to our conversation together and to a Q&A with each other.
Esther, thank you so much. And I have to say that tonight was originally envisioned to be in a ballroom not far from here with 500 people, and what you would hear right now and what I hope you do hear is the resounding applause of people who are just so deeply touched. And we sort of have to, it's a part of what we're struggling with right now, and that you've talked about so eloquently tonight, is the ways in which our fundamental need, our fundamental interdependence, and our need to connect with others have been profoundly challenged in this time, and that we have to rely on a chat feed, to get a bit of feedback, human feedback from others, where we might have been able to breathe with them and look at them and see them in the past. And so thank you so much for being with us in this way tonight. I am going to start with...
I hope I'm able to come across the screen in some way. Me too. I would be doing all kinds of interactive things, and I would be asking questions to the audience,
And we know that there will be a time for that again. And in the meantime, we are going to bring some of the questions that people have had into this space. I'll start with, I have a million. I'm just going to ask one of my own, which we've had a moment of synchronicity tonight that you may not be aware of. So 2 weeks ago, we had Anthony Ray Hinton as a speaker in this space, and you may not know him. He was on death row for 30 years for a crime he didn't commit in Alabama. He was finally exonerated, and when we talked to him about his how he survived and actually really transformed the experience while he was incarcerated. He used language very similar to yours when you talked about finding freedom in confinement through the imagination. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit more, and maybe in a bit of a practical sense, about how to experience that freedom in relationship. I'm a pretty introverted guy. I'll race off to a novel or a Netflix really quickly. But when it comes to like with me and with my partner, what does that look like?
Right. Let me tell you where I got the image, first of all. I mean, I have read actually quite a bit of accounts from people who were in solitary confinement. And this is where that question always came about, like, but also asking my own parents, what made you get up every morning? I mean, how did you continue to want to live? You know, it baffles me. But in the moment during the pandemic, it came from me from one of my, I do yoga, you know, I gathered a group of friends and we began to meet 4 times a week, and which we've done now for 5 months as a way of staying connected as well. But one of the positions that we were doing, the teacher said, you have to hold yourself, and then you have to open up, but you can't really open up. You have to imagine yourself open up. It's your imagination. You think that you're opening, but in fact, you really are confined. And I thought this is it's the same in the body. So I wanted to first physicalize this, that, you know, imagine you're holding your elbows and you're trying to pull your arms apart. As you're doing just that, you can't do much, but it changes your entire position. The thought that you are opening something that is locked. And from there, I started to think about multiple ways, and I'll give you a moment of my personal experience. It was March 31st. We were completely in the moment of the epicenter of New York City, and I was celebrating our anniversary, and we just basically decided to do exactly that. We got dressed as if we were going to go out. We stepped outside of the house, we turned around, and we came back in and pretended that we were going to the restaurant. And I just thought, that's what kids do. That's exactly how they open up the space through their imagination. And then we sat down and I said, and we had a fake menu, you know, what would you like to eat? And we played this thing out, you know, didn't last very long, but it was like, oh man, there is a way that if you can't do the trip on the outside, you can do the trip on the inside. So, then it became, you know, what are other ways like that? But there's 2 things that it does. It's not just that you play at going and you pretend you're going out. It's that you also allow yourself to play, because the imagination is also about playing, and playing is about subverting reality. It's it's that notion that, you know, you can, as this person said, you can lock him up. Physically, you can lock him up. But up here, in his heart, in his head, he can still move more freely. I wouldn't say freely, but certainly more freely. There is a place where you cannot reach him. This is the theory of Viktor Frankl, right? You cannot change your circumstances, but you can change your relationship to the circumstances. And that's the imagination, is that you start to think, you know, some people in the midst of the pandemic began to think very morbidly. This is the end, you know, the world is going under, we have to contract, we have to seclude, we have to go into vigilant mode and protect. And other people were saying, you know, as long as I can walk, as long as I can, you know, I must stay open to the life, I stay open to the world, I defy that sense of deadness, and everything in between. But this is the pendulum that we are navigating all the time. It's just that when bad things happen, you are acutely living with it on a daily basis. Yes. The rest of the time, we just put it a little bit, you know, it's the denial of death.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that connects. I want to get to I could talk with you all night. But then you bring in the denial of death, and then there's Zygmunt Bauman. I want to talk about Bauman, but I won't do that. So I want to ask a question from one of our great friends of the Jung Center, Jill Carroll. She asked, how do we take some pressure off of our romantic relationships, right? We're in this situation that you described of, everything,
Right,
this divine need is compressed down. Yeah. How do we release that?
It's a great question. Look, I think there's a few different things that people have done and can do. I tend to think the first and foremost is humor. It's really the ability to say, lots of people will tell you the first month or two, they were very attentive. They made an effort. They cleaned the table when they finished working and made it into a dining room table. They took walks together. Half the people were talking about taking walks and being in nature. And there was a kind of a level of deliberate attention to our relationship and to our fragility. And then it starts to feel long. It starts to feel like, when is this ending? And so you start to hear people describe about how, if one person went to visit somebody finally in the summer where they could be away from each other, like people needed space. People needed to be able to not be on top of each other the whole time. People started to do things alone. People started to create book clubs, movie clubs, discussion groups with other people, just so that they could hear other things, and sometimes it was on Zoom, and sometimes they started to do collective walks. That's the new thing now. 2-3 people take a walk together, each one on their phone, each one completely somewhere else, away from their partner. So the first thing is to just really acknowledge it's tedious. It's really tough to be like that, so intensely on top of each other all the time. And when the fear loosens, then you get into the monotony and the routine of it. The second thing is to really reach out to others, to not think that because you are physically just 2 people, you have to be socially just 2 people. You can be physically distant and socially uber connected at this point, more than usual, actually more than usual. The third thing is rituals. It's to create rituals so that you don't have a sense that everything is bleeding into each other. It's rituals around the work and not work. It's ritual around the week and the weekend. It's creating delineations and demarcations, because rituals create symbolism, and symbolism organizes and lifts us from the mundane into something that is a little more elevated, so that you don't just look at this person, Now, all in all, I will add one thing on top of all of this that I think is really crucial, is humor. I think people should feel like they have a right to complain and make it into an art, but good complaining is very juicy and very funny, and that they give each other a lot of slack. They cut each other a lot of slack, and that they find a way to create appreciations. Not like nice things to say, but just, it's nice to not just say, that was a nice thing that you brought me coffee this morning, but just to say, that was very kind of you to do, so that you make comments not about the acts, but about the person. It softens things. It's easy to get irritated, to get impatient, and to dump all of it on the partner. And when you do that, you want a bit of humor that kind of says, how far am I from my quota? Can I dump a little more on you? Like, you have to find a way to do it, and then to subvert the very thing of doing it, because then you create complicity instead of antagonism.
That's wonderful. That's immediately applying it in my life. There's another question that. So I want to set up the next question from Jose Leal, a member of our community. I think is in Mexico. Actually dialed in tonight. You mentioned very early in the talk. You mentioned that sibling relationships are not as taxed. Friend relationships are not as taxed right now, but parent-child relationships are taxed. And I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about what you see of parent-child relationships, particularly in the context where parents are dealing. There's a lot of relational chaos right now that may or may not be exacerbated by the pandemic.
So I would say parent-child relationship was already undergoing a revolution before the pandemic. basically the centrality of the child has reached almost an apex of folly in many family lives. And a lot of it has to do with the economic burden of children. Instead of children being assets, they are drains, economically speaking. So the importance of making sure that the children kind of, pay off. I'm not saying this in a crude sense. The investment that parents put in, and I'm not just talking about the economic investment, it's time, it's resources, it's attention. It's the fact that parents spend their afternoon activities on the weekend watching their little Smurfs touch a ball, roll it once in a while, and basically are depleted. The tension is not just what we are giving our children. The tension is also that we want to give all of that to our children at the same time as we want also to have relationships that are meaningful, sustaining, and fulfilling. And those two things at the same time is virtually impossible. Add to that the pandemic, everybody in the house, homeschooling, parents who have to straddle, sometimes the only place they can be for 5 minutes on a conference call is in a car, become a teacher of math and of history and of English and God knows what else, if you can, if you even can. Have to have Wi-Fi to be able to do so, have to have enough laptops in your house to be able to do so. And then hopefully you don't have children who need more services than what just two parents can do. Many of our children need more than just a nuclear family model. But you can't bring grandma in because that's dangerous, because the child goes to the playground, because the father goes to work or the mother goes to work outside of the house, and grandma and grandpa could be vulnerable. And suddenly the resources that would be usually available are not there either. Certainly if you have a nanny, you can't bring her unless you created a pod. But you didn't think about that in time. It takes a while to figure out this concept of the pod. This became massively chaotic, disruptive, and a crescendo of frustrations, that for many people was extremely difficult. And then people began to be resourceful again. They started to think about bringing a few families together, bringing one person that help with the children, rotating the parents in a co-op form, basically all kinds of forms of interdependence around the children. But then they had to wait from state to state. Everybody didn't know, are we going back to school, not going back to school, 2 days a week, which child, which day? So this is a country that relies intensely on its institutions and hopes that the institutions, lead the way. And it's not really happening like that. So it throws people even more into thinking that, it throws people into privatization of problems. Social problems become privatized. And now every family needs to figure this out alone. And class systems become even more manifest at those moments. So the more collective people can think, and that is not necessarily in the DNA of many people here, to think not how do I go at this alone, but who can I do this with? Who wants that help? Who else is struggling with that? And to reach out rather than to retreat and to go into kind of, solo mode when you're faced with these kinds of challenges, the better it is. And I think after a while, we will start to hear more and more of these creative ideas that people came up with. Americans like to think about it in terms of grassroots. It's the basic creative levels are considered grassroots. Okay, but that's what we're going to see vis-a-vis the children and the parents at this point. You also have children who suddenly have to take care of their parents. That's a whole other thing. Children who need to go home to take care of parents who were not particularly kind to them in the first place, who they couldn't wait to get away from 10 years ago. And suddenly, so there are so many intense issues around family dynamics. And then add to that substance abuse or, violence in the house of all sorts. And that too enters into the relationship between parent and child. So I think we've only beginning to hear how much stress and pressure this has done to families. In addition, let's end with that. How many parents spend hours trying to get their kids off their devices? or kids trying to get their parents off their devices.
Yeah.
And we are now, that's it. The devices are the only way you stay connected to school and to friends and to family. And so,
right.
man, I want to see family meals where people can still sit hands-free and talk to each other for a half an hour. And that will tell us what goes on between parents and children.
It's very difficult, and those skills, to the degree that they were still, or those rituals, to the degree that they were still existed, and that they've been further degraded, right, during this period of time. And
enormously.
Yeah, we have to be, very deliberate and conscientious to reestablish those kinds of rituals. And I guess, and I'm mindful of our time. Thank you so much for your for everything you've given us tonight. I want to ask one more question, and then what we're going to do, I want to set this up for everybody who's listening. This night is not over after this last question. We will be moving on to discussions. There will be a link after this last question, as there are answers. There'll be a link that appears on your screen that all you have to do is click it, and it will take you to a Zoom conversation where you can continue this discussion. We have 3 wonderful Jung Center instructors, John Price and Anna Guerra, and Lee Coffey, who are going to be leading those conversations, as well as the conversation that Esther and I will have a conversation that continues as well. So with that, I want to ask this last question, which is, and I think it's sort of paired questions. The first is a question that somebody asked us is, no, Esther, like you made us write down what was important takeaways for us. We need to know what your important takeaways for us are. But but the second question, which we'll have served for that, which is, what are the keys for creating an emotionally intimate relationship from your vantage point? If you were going to give us those takeaways, what are the keys?
Well, you basically had one question, but you made it into 2 because
you noticed that. Yeah.
I seriously, when I think about the takeaways, I would say the first one is this. If we started with the sentence, the quality of your relationships determines the quality of your life. What is the quality of your relationships at this moment? If you sit alone for a bit and you say, how am I doing? Partner, if you have, new person you're seeing, your kids, if you have, friends, family members, how am I doing? And what's something that I would like to do differently or better? Because this is the moment. This is a very, very good time because you have permission. You have permission to call people you haven't called in a long time. You can, because COVID oblige, as we say, it gives you it's understandable that we want to reach out. So that's one thing. It's really this reach out. You owe people phone calls. You owe people apologies. You owe people explanations. You owe people to just tell them that you've missed them. And this is a good moment to do that. It is intensely important to our integrity. You owe to talk with your children about what I call the 3 taboos of the moment. I'm doing this whole conference through my training platform sessions that is called Forbidden Conversations, Death, Sex, and Money. Do we talk about them? It's not the taboo of sex and the taboo of money and of death that we are inhibited in having conversations about these very subjects. And I think that once you start, it's irresistible. Be it with friends or with family members or with your own older children. So that's the other thing. And then what other takeaway? If you're lonely, make yourself useful. Really, I think that that gives us a reason to get up, is to know that maybe we're not always loved the way we want, but we can be cared for. We can take care of others and be needed the way we want. And when you are needed by people who appreciate what you do, you feel more cared for and loved. It actually circles around like that. This is a time when in our relationships we are going to see many of the cracks, but this is also a time in our relationships where we can see the light that shines through the cracks. And now to the question about how do we establish a greater degree of emotional intimacy? I think that you want to ask yourself, what is the Venn diagram of your relationship? Some of us are this way. Big territories of differentiation, lots of individuality, lots of separateness, and a very strong core. And some of us have this. So the first thing I would say is, if you think about establishing emotional intimacy, I don't think there is a one size fits all. There is absolutely not one way to do this. There are couples who have a deep, intimate core. They do very little together. They are very different in personalities, but they share some fundamentals. And it has to do with values, and it has to do with deep appreciation for who the other person is. And not just appreciation, but I would say admiration. More than respect, it's admiration. So it's not just because people open up to each other and share intimate things. I think that Michelle Schenkman wrote a wonderful new paper about intimacy and the fact that it's intimate moments. It's not an intimate relationship, and that you can find that intimacy with strangers. You can find that intimacy when you share a crisis with somebody because you're stranded in an airport. And I think that once we open that up, rather than, it's one model of how we feel connected, I think that we will actually have many more people that will feel connected if they don't think that the only way to be connected is XYZ. Combined with that, talking. We have a bit of a feminization of intimacy at this moment that we believe it is about talking. And for some people, that is not how they express their connection, and that we need to become bilingual. At least bilingual, the language of the body and the language of the words. And that plays around gender, for sure. I would even say more than bilingual, we should be multilingual when it comes to intimacy, so we can translate. That care comes in many forms. That is the languages of love that he talks about. But I think it's even broader than that. So I'm not answering to you because my answer is less about the specific things that make people feel close than actually an invitation to open up what close can feel like, so that many more people will be included in the experience of emotional intimacy.
Just beautiful. Esther, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation this evening. And as I say, we will continue it momentarily. I'm glad. And you've given as the proxy for what would have been 500 people in a ballroom, I have to say, God bless you. Thank you so much. This has been really, really rich for me personally. And what we will do now is transition. And on your screen, we will see here momentarily a link. And what you are to do is to click on it, and it will take you to will take you all of us to Zoom. I'm gonna ask for your patience. Understand that it will take just a minute or two after you click on that for us to be put into our breakout rooms.
Patient. I dealt for an hour with tech problems before I could come on, so I've had.
We're grateful to you for bearing through that, and pushing through and getting to the other side of it. Thank you, Esther. Yeah, we're grateful. This is the age of the internet of internet relationships too. That there are these sort of calls to be mindful and present for for a few moments as we wait for the connection to be made, because it's worth it when the connection is made. So so for all of us, I'm going to say good night and thank you to all of you who are participating. All of our many donors who made this evening possible. We're deeply grateful to you. I am personally grateful to the staff of the Jung Center, many of whom are here in the building with us tonight, and to our Board of Trustees as well. And particularly you saw her at the beginning to Melanie Gray, who it was her idea to bring you as there, and she's championed this, and what a rich experience for all of us tonight. So with that, please click the link, and we'll see you in a couple minutes.